understanding the technology that powers the money is essential. Knowing the business drivers that inspire how the money is made is crucial. Bridging the gap between the mind of the technologist and the mind of the business is monumental. That is what TBF is all about. Let's start this never-ending conversation. It's time.
Friday. Welcome to another episode of the Tech Behind FinTech. I am extremely excited today. I'm going to get emotional, but I always get emotional when he comes on. But it's a whole thing right now. But I have my brother, one of my best friends, someone I've known since I was about 13, who we went to high school together, majored in computer science, college together, majored in computer science, and then we separated in terms of schools, but a lot of stuff like that. Worked together in college in the computer labs. He's doing amazing things. No other than Michael J. Warthen. Welcome to the show, Michael.
All right. Thanks, Nam. Glad to be here.
Only in front of only two people I know call you Michael, your wife and me, just now. All the time I called you Mike. I don't know why I said Michael. I felt like we're on camera. I've never called you. I think I've only called you Michael in jokes. I've never called you Michael seriously. But my main guy, Michael or Mike Warthen. Even though we've been friends for for decades, I'm still going to keep it official, and I'm going to read your outstanding bio before we get into it, so I can introduce you to the people who don't know you as well as I know you. Okay, Michael currently serves as a technical advisor to the CEO of Microsoft. Michael joined the company in February 2021, bringing with him a diverse portfolio of work experience across a variety of industries, including healthcare, financial services, and most recently, media and communications. He's made a mark across industries, building one of the first electronic medical records platforms for clinical trials, helping disrupt the high net worth asset management ecosystem and modernizing traditional media delivery pipelines to cloud scale. In addition to the digital world, he loves getting outside to experience new places and has a deep appreciation for the underwater world explored through aquatic activities like snorkeling and hobbies like reef keeping. You might also find him in the kitchen trying to revolutionize gourmet cooking. Now, that last part though, Mike's an outstanding cook, and I've tasted his barbecue before. And if you haven't, you are missing out.
Nice.
Mike, welcome to the show. Today is a really topic that's near and dear to our hearts. We're going to talk about the underbanked, and we're going to talk about artificial intelligence. So the title of the show is Financial Inclusion Redefined, Crafting AI Solutions for the Underbanked. It's a lot. And I think before we jump into the show, let's get a definition real quick. I love these slides. So, underbanked. Being underbanked refers to individuals or households who have limited access to traditional banking services and financial products. While underbanked individuals may have a bank account, they typically rely on alternative financial services and may lack access to a full range of banking products, such as credit, loans, and investment opportunities. This can be due to factors such as low income, limited credit history, lack of proximity to bank branches, or distrust of traditional financial institutions. The underbanked population often faces challenges in managing their finances, saving, and building credit, which can hinder their financial stability and upward mobility. Let's get personal, right? So, we're both from Brooklyn, New York. As I mentioned, I've known Mike for decades, since I was about 13 years old. We come from, Brooklyn, inner city, 90s, crack epidemic. A lot of things going on during that time.
A lot of things going on, yeah.
A lot of people who haven't, who didn't make it, who ended up in jail, dead, or just, succumb to just life circumstances. So, seeing all these things, right? underbanked individual, money under the mattress type people. So, now we're in a situation where we have access to technology. We are both in technology. Mike's on the forefront working for Mike. I mean, and keep the bio. He consults the CEO of Microsoft. I mean, understand what that means. That's huge, by the way. So, cutting edge of technology now, and now looking at technology like AI that are on the tip of everybody's tongue. A lot of startups are using it. And then there's a whole swath of people that don't even know what the hell we're talking about. Where do we go, Mike?
So look, yeah, as you pointed out, right, we grew up under circumstances that many people face today. Unfortunately, I'd love to say that things have massively changed in the past 30, 40 years, but the reality is that stress on the underserved populations when it comes to the financial system is as real as it ever has been. And in our role, as you pointed out, Namdi, I think the important thing that I'd love this audience and those who I talk to remember is, it's getting the landscape of building applications and building software is changing. And in this moment, in this AI moment in particular, there's such a new way to think about building applications and really taking advantage of the technology in a way that accelerates the ability to provide services and capabilities to all communities, including those underserved communities. So obviously being on the Tech Behind FinTech, the focus here is talking about what that means financially. And of course, yes, these technologies can work for enterprises, et cetera. But I'd love to contemplate a little bit about how we could build, a theoretical capability using these technologies for the underserved population, right? And as you pointed out in your definition there are things that where they may have a bank account, but they don't have access to the knowledge or the information of how to grow that bank account, or how to make that take advantage of the money that they have to build other assets and get into asset classes that they've never been into before. So I think the convergence of the AI technology we have right now for building applications and making it easier, which is entirely different than what you might have thought just a few years ago, and the opportunity to help serve at the same time as you're building capabilities for the big enterprises or the everyday person, to make sure to add that additional consideration for making sure capabilities are built into your technologies that serve a broader population. And the cost efficiency of that, I think, for the way the AI supports and helps you build applications, makes that a more palatable approach these days than it may have been in the past.
And, on that same note, I want to get into some people don't. I kind of like stats. I think sometimes numbers bring things home a bit. Mm-hmm. Let's just look at the stats with the underbanked and unbanked in the U.S., right? Let me get the screen a little bit bigger so I can see what's going on. 81% of adults were fully banked in 2021 compared with 71% in 2015. So in this stat, right, the unbanked remain pretty consistent, right? They're pretty low at that 10% mark. Just below the underbanked is about less than 20%. Fully banked stats are growing higher. Next stat, caught my eye. Black adults have the highest unbanked and underbanked rates of any race or ethnicity. So we look at overall the underbanked. So I think the blue is unbanked. So overall, that's about 6%. Underbanked, that's between 10 and 15%. Look at the Black non-Hispanic, going in the range of 27% in 2021, underbanked, and about 13% unbanked. It means no bank. Compared to look at white non-Hispanic, the unbanked is less than 5%. Underbanked is sitting around 10%. Asian non-Hispanic look like they have the best stats, closer to 2-3% unbanked versus underbanked at 6%. So just wanted to throw those stats out.
And the thing that stands out about those stats, is when you think about like what that actually means, right? Because to your point, you can throw stats up and it tells you a story. But in reality, those communities that go underserved, the wealth multiplication, to be able to sort of really have the wealth building, access to wealth building is limited when you look at those numbers, right? It's not just about one individual or counting one or two individuals. It's really looking at the generations behind those individuals and the connection between those individuals in terms of how the money multiplies. If you follow finance and things, about the multiplier effect and things like that. That does not penetrate the communities in the way that it should. And again, a lot of it is access to capabilities and technologies that make that happen. And I think that's the moment we're in right now allows us to think, I think, more critically about this and find ways to incorporate capabilities in our applications and the things we build every day to address some of these kind of discrepancies.
And when you think about those stats, right, and when you start looking at underbanked and unbanked, there are some characteristics there or assumptions that we can make. One, you don't probably have a good insight on credit and
right.
building credit and how to leverage credit. Because, I talked earlier about, let me just get this stat off real quick so we can just talk. I talked earlier about our schooling, and we had a great opportunity, shout out Brooklyn Tech, to have majors in high school that were computer science. But in all of those majors in our education in college and all this technical stuff, no teacher taught me about credit, right? So at all, but it becomes so important after you start in the working world and the things you can do. Even now, I mean, even certain jobs we start getting into banking, they run your credit. So let's say now you have no knowledge of that, no one teaches you that. How do you get a foothold, right? Like I know. I distinctly remember a slew of credit card companies. They might have put more regulation around them now on our college campus.
Yeah.
And I remember being able to apply and get them and running it up on pure foolishness. I bought foolishness, clothing that I don't even have anymore. I remember being in so much debt at the time, relative speaking, right? For a 19-year-old.
Yeah, absolutely.
I remember being so stressed out about it. And my sister, who's 12 years older than me, she started her working world. She's a physician. I remember her coming and bailing me out, and literally bailing me out. I'll never forget that. We talk every day. She doesn't let me forget that, and I don't forget that. but here's what that led to, right? I graduate college. I defer my college loans.
Yep.
I buy my first home at 23. That doesn't happen if someone, she bailed me out. But if I didn't have to get the knowledge of how important credit is, that doesn't happen. I don't get that opportunity, which led to other opportunities, which led to how do you start building an asset base? So, I wanted to tell that story because, as you mentioned, right, you talk about these stats, but how does it now start playing an impact in your life? And, definitely if you're unbanked, don't really understand the financial system like that. You're not taking advantage. As we know, especially with businesses, they leverage credit to get more things accomplished, right?
Right.
We have a question from our audience. Let's get into that. Rachel Ross, another Temple alumni. Okay. The first thing I thought when I heard those stats, the lack of access to home ownership and other wealth building opportunities, right on the money, Rachel. Definitely, yes, 100%. Thank you for that comment. We have a LinkedIn user. I don't have your name. LinkedIn user, you have access to someone with this knowledge to understand these things like investments. 100%. It's like, but what if you don't have access? Mike, you're about to say something.
Yeah, I mean, this that last user, and thank you, Rachel. Your point is absolutely right. The last user raised a good question. So if some people are lucky enough to have someone they can tap into that may have that experience or can cover situations like where you were in Namdi, but in the reality, in this day and age, not everyone has that kind of resource. and providing that resource to a user, to an end person who's trying to, fill out a credit application, et cetera, has been challenging in the past, right? You have to go build into your application all this information and not really building features that actually help, do things easier, but you're instead just building information flows that don't really come across, almost like you're trying to read a document while you're trying to go apply for credit and get a quick, credit card and go do something. And you don't have the wherewithal most times, at least, especially at our age at that time, to go and read this document first and then come back later and fill the application. But the magic of AI today, and many of you are probably experiencing this through things like ChatGPT from OpenAI, is the ability to have that friend, if you will. I wouldn't necessarily humanize AI in that way, but that what we tend to call these days co-pilot, that really can help you understand some of the as an end user, some of the context of what you're getting ready to get into. And think about it today on that campus. I'm guessing, I haven't been on campus in a long time, but I'm guessing there's probably, instead of filling out the application on the little pamphlet that we had, they're probably giving you a QR code, right? And you're going to whip out your phone and you're going to scan that QR code, and it's going to take you into a site to go fill out the application. And there's a touch point right there. It's all digital already, where if you were someone building that application, it might be handy or helpful for you to be able to build in the kind of capability you see with ChatGPT into the application process, so that the person can say, hey, I'm interested in this credit card, but tell me a little bit about X, right? Whatever, tell me a little bit about how I pay it back, or those things. And yes, it's in the disclosures, it's in the fine print, but now you could actually build into your application a conversational flow that'll help that user, that end user who might be underbanked, unbanked, or inexperienced, et cetera, get the information they need in context of trying to actually sell your service. It's a very, very powerful consideration, because you don't really have to go code a whole nother set of capabilities just to pass information forward. It's inherent in the models, in these AI capabilities, and you can build them right into your application. And that's what's really exciting to me, is that you actually tap into this wealth of knowledge. Imagine bottling the world's knowledge in these large language models, for at least written knowledge, and these models were trained on that world's knowledge, with its biases, with there's a lot of implications to that. But at the end of the day, the information is now accessible at the touch of an end of an API that can bring forward, without you having, as a company, to go spend the resources, go doing the research, bringing the information in, and then trying to pass it on to your users. And it makes for a much more informed user base. And in the context of what we're talking about, we can actually help those underbanked and underserved communities with information, which is what, all of those stats and everything we've talked about. That's the main thing, in my opinion, that gap leaves, is the lack of information to make the best decision for yourself. And these co-pilots and these capabilities with the large language models and these AI models really, really shrink that gap significantly.
We have some comments from the audience. Let me put them on the screen real quick. A lot of interaction today. Chigozi, this is a good friend, one of our past guests on the show. How can AI tools make the utility of complex financial tools easier? We're going to get into that in the show. Next, Jeffrey Morton, a viewer of the show every week. Thank you, Jeff, for your comment. Happy Friday. I can literally tell you that there was no education in the credit space, or even financing through school, or even mentorship. Credit card companies all over college campus baiting you with free pizza. My knowledge mainly came from research, but it wasn't easy.
It wasn't easy. Yeah. Great point.
Rachel, again, Jeffrey Martin. Yes, I learned the hard way with credit cards, starting with the freshman year card I got for free with a free T-shirt. I lost the shirt along the way, but held on to that debt for a while. My son is 2 years off of college, and we're teaching him all the things now. Skip the free pizza and free T-shirt. But here's the deal, right? Even a secret I learned with my own daughter, right? Provide them that. Now, if you have an understanding of that, with the whole credit thing, get your kid a credit card, right? Instead of giving them an allowance, let them use the credit card, monitor it, like put a limit on it, right? And now what happens is their credit is being built. Right. By the time they get out of college, they're gonna have like a 750 credit score, right? Because it's controlled. Because here's the deal: in order to build your credit, you need to use credit. Right? So, yeah. But and now, I mean, that's little tips I've learned along the way. You try to pass on, but and I have now in the world I'm in now, I have friends who their parents, right, got them into investing when they were real young. I know a guy I was just talking to, a former police officer. He was saying, yeah, his portfolio is crazy. Oh, my parents got me into that. But but once again, if you start looking at certain communities and you start looking at, okay, these are underbanked, that knowledge, you have to make the assumption is not there.
Right.
So back to the original point in terms of building wealth. We have one more comment, and then we're gonna LinkedIn user, don't know your name. A shared secured credit card at that. Oh yeah, back to what I just said.
Right. Yeah. So those tips, the knowledge, all of those things, that's the magic. I think, in my opinion, I call it magic, but it's really just math. But at the end of the day, that's the magic of these AI models, is that those kind of tidbits and that knowledge is by the way these models were trained and the information that were gathered. Those kind of points of knowledge and those tips are accessible, right? If you ask the right question, you get an answer that will help you decide. It could even lay out, like, here's what you should do to get your kid, build your kid's credit before they go to college, or here's what you should tell your kids. So even if you don't know personally or haven't experienced it personally, again, the ability to pass on knowledge or access knowledge that you didn't even personally have. And for us as engineers and us in the field, in the business world, to be able to build in technology into our applications that give access to our users to that kind of information, that's really where I want this audience and everyone I talk to think about this moment right now, right? And so, yeah, I know we're going to get into the technology part of this conversation, but that's sort of the point here, is that you don't have to invest a lot in trying to go manufacture this research any longer, and you don't have to rely on the hope that someone in your network and in your family knows. Only now you can actually add in, as a responsible developer, you can add into your application this and give the access to this knowledge to your users. So this is, by the way, this is not just a financial thing. We're using the financial world as an example, but it's true in almost any field that you can think of, where the large swath of data that these models were trained on allows for at least these co-pilot sort of capabilities to bring you insight and information that you hadn't had before. And let alone the generative part of it, just bringing some of the information forward is a key, I think, value proposition for these new technologies.
Like, so you're gonna have some people looking at this show. We talk about AI. Can we take a time now to just base knowledge, right?
Yeah.
Some just going through some AI definitions and so forth.
Yeah, go for it. Yep.
All right, so I'm gonna add it to the screen, some stuff that a common question that may come up, and you can say it in your own words. I just have the definitions on the screen so people can screenshot it if they want. What's artificial intelligence?
Oh, you're asking me? I'm sorry, I thought you were.
Oh, that's okay now.
No, so no worries. So I don't have the red definition you have there. The way I would describe it to the audience is really taking advantage of that information capability built into a computer, what do we call model. And so the idea is that the models are trained on information, right? It could be image information, it could be textual information, and they mimic the technique used, the mathematical technique used mimics the brain, right? It mimics the idea of neurons and connections between information, the way our own brain works. And using that approach, especially now with the models today, you actually get a mechanism where the computer is able to connect. If you ask a question with certain words and certain information, the computer is able to connect that to other concepts and other words and other ideas and bring that forward and essentially craft communication back to you as you're asking a question that is almost as if you're talking to somebody who has that knowledge directly. And so it's just taking the knowledge that it's trained on and bringing that forward in almost like a brain, if you think of it that way. And so that's why it's considered artificial intelligence. Now, I want to be very clear: it's not sentient. This is not a Terminator computer, that knows how to think and has a feeling and a personality. It is simply a mathematical algorithm in its simplest sense. It's much more complex than that, but if you think about it way down to that just knows how to take the words you communicate or the images that you're showing it and connect it to other things that has been trained on and regurgitate that back to you in a way that makes sense. And that's essentially the intelligence part. It's almost like having a conversation with a human. It's the same idea. Somebody's going to go, yeah, I know about that, and then they talk about their experience. Well, the computer's doing that by looking it up in its own internal database, if you will, and presenting that back to you. So it comes across as intelligence, but it's really just an algorithm that provides that capability.
So these are the terms you hear: AI. You hear another term, machine learning, which is a subset and involving training an algorithm to learn patterns from data.
Yes.
Mike mentioned the word training, right? What does that mean to people? Like, what should people help understand when you say training data?
Yeah, it's again very similar. There's a lot of similarities, obviously, to how the human brain works. In order to learn something, you have to either experience it or be taught it, and be taught it multiple times. While training a model is the same idea, right? You need to provide it the information, the documents, the text, the images, and it turns it into bits and bytes and recognizes those sequence of bits and bytes as a pattern. And it'll essentially store that pattern in its quote unquote memory. And then ultimately that process of showing it or feeding it, if you will, is called training, because what you're essentially doing is putting the data into this massive database, and it uses the math algorithms to store it efficiently so that it can connect the relationships together. As I mentioned earlier on the intelligence part of it, how it comes across as intelligence, it makes those connections. So it's really feeding the data and showing it and training the model so it understands how to make sense of that data, that when you show it something new, it can reference something that it already knows to try and make the connections between something new and something it already knows.
And some other terms, because this TBF, the Tech Behind FinTech, we also have a podcast. So a lot of the webcasts, we have presentations and stuff. So we're just going to go over some things for the podcast listeners as well. There's other concepts. If you're hearing this term AI that you may hear like neural networks, where it's like, that's the idea of a concept of deep learning where you're trying to mimic the structure of the human brain. Mike, can you go into natural language processing? That's another thing that people that are trying to understand this field may get into.
Yeah. So if you take everything we just talked about, right, the neural network brain sort of mimicking in terms of how the algorithms work, you talk about the training in terms of feeding that data so that neural network can build itself out in these models. Ultimately you get into a situation where now you have this massive database, and for the techies out there, you got to query it, right? You got to ask it questions. And traditionally, if you are a developer or you kind of know how developers sort of operate when it comes to databases, there's a structured language you have to use to say, go retrieve this information. There's concepts of tables and rows, which we won't get into here, but it's structured in a way, and you have to ask it those questions in that way. You have to understand the programming language to get access to that data. Well, with these models, in the way that they're shaped and the way that they're structured, not only do they have the information in them, but they also can take the question or the information you're providing newly as you're using them and use that same mechanism to make sense of the words you've now put forth to ask it, to make those connections to the data that it has inherently in its internal database. And because of that the way that works, in essence, you can ask it in a normal language, right? Natural language. You can ask a question. What was something what was the ratio of underbanked to banked in 2021, or whatever the question you might have? when you ask it that in a natural way, as you would another person or in a normal conversation, these models have the ability to break that question down, connect the words that you've provided to it, look up as an internal database, connect where those words show up, and present back data to you that says, this is what I know about that question, without you having to have a special programming language to go query that application. And obviously we think of in the US we think about English, but it's natural language in many cases in the language that you speak, being able to communicate with these models in a natural way rather than having to learn a special language to talk with them.
Let's go over some more. So I mean, you might hear the term algorithm, step-by-step set of instructions, and an AI model follows to perform a specific task. What other words I'm looking for? Mike, you talked about retrieval augment generation during our pre-conversation. Can you get into that? That's something that I think that's a little bit more advanced, but it's good that let's just break that down, what that means.
Yeah, well, it might be helpful, Namdi, if we can go to the presentation, because it kind of, to bring it in context, I can sort of run through this. I know we only have a few minutes left, but I can run through these pieces quickly and bring that in context, because that one's a little bit more.
I know you have a hard stop. I think this might go a little bit over. I know you have a hard stop around 12:55 or so we have some time. Before we get into that, we have a comment from the audience, hoping you touch on how to minimize biases in these AI models. I almost think to partition the data used in the model or add an indicator specifically for the underbanked. Interesting. Okay. You want to tackle that, Mike? Or
we can, in the presentation, just remind me to touch on that, because there is in this way of thinking about building applications now, there are mechanisms to incorporate considerations for how you reduce or at least deal with the inconsistencies or the biases. It's not, let's be realistic, like these models are trained on billions and billions of parameters, right? It's really a lot of data. There is no realistic way to extract bias, and who's biased, right? Who's deciding what data is included and not included. And so there's bias in almost every human being, and obviously naturally the products we build will have bias in them. However, if you have specific use cases like this, there are techniques in the architecture to be able to take the results of the model and further refine them to make sure they fit into what you as an application developer or as an engineer building these systems think appropriate. And one of the most important techniques, in my opinion right now, is grounding. What I just said about these models is kind of an important point, that process of being able to sort of respond to what you're asking in natural language is not bound by it's math, right? And so if the words show up based on what you asked, if I said, what are underbanked in 2021 or whatever, if there's enough data in the database that says that there's no such thing as underbanked, it's going to say that, right? The models could theoretically produce any results, that words that come to mind as it crosses across its neural network to figure out what the response should be to your question. The problem is that what we call hallucination, manifests itself there, because essentially the models could produce information that sounds realistic, but is not actually accurate. And so, to your commenter's point there, having the ability to filter or control wrapped around these models is an important factor in building these applications, because you don't want to, support misinformation or really have these models making up things and passing them off as fact. And because they're so good at showing results relative to what you asked it could come across as fact. So that's an important responsibility that we all have. And we here at Microsoft take responsible AI very, very seriously. We have a whole framework around how we think about these things to, minimize or reduce biases and account for those and be transparent about where the biases are showing up. But in our application stack, in the application stack around these technologies, you have the ability to run processes in sequence to catch those kind of moments.
Let's go to your presentation. It's on my side. It's showing a blank screen when I want to add it. So I don't know what you have to do.
Oh,
to
do I
make
have
it.
to
There you go.
reshare?
Now it's good. So
I'll
now
try
it's
it
good.
again.
It's good
Oh,
now. It's good now.
Okay. All right.
I can add it.
Great. Let me know
Right.
when it's showing up.
Yeah. I don't know why it's not coming. It
right.
went.
We'll try it again.
I see it in the green room, but when I add it, I don't see anything.
I'm going to stop it and start it again. Let's see if that works.
All right, let's do that.
All right, let's do that. And then
cool. I see it coming up. Yep, it's up right now.
All right, yeah, it's technology, right? So everything we just talked about in this moment culminates in this opportunity to access these AI models and the data within them. Pretty straightforwardly from the behind an API, right? As we've been probably using for a long time in technology these days. And the term that we'd like to sort of talk about in terms of thinking about this, I mentioned earlier, is this idea of a co-pilot. But there's some pieces to this that are very important when you look at building an application. And this is one of our leaders here presented this a little while back at the Microsoft Build. And it's a really good, I think, way to think about the technology stack that sits behind these things and where you have to understand where you put in your controls as an application developer and how you take advantage of these models at the maximum level. And so this picture here, as you see it, there's a stack. There's the applications at the top, right? The co-pilots themselves, the things you build. And the co-pilot is essentially the moniker wrapped around accessing the AI model's information. The idea of plugins, which are essentially APIs, if you want to think about it that way, that bring more information into the co-pilots. Remember, these models are shipped and stacked from a specific point in time. Because there's so much data, it's impossible to continuously update that model every day with new knowledge. So you almost have to rely on, and it doesn't know personal knowledge. It doesn't know corporate secrets or those kind of things. It doesn't know things that might be personal to you or data that you might have. There's no way that it would have been trained on that if it wasn't something that the model wasn't trained on. So in order to,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I want to make sure the audience is following because you said API. So API, if everyone doesn't know, is application programming interface. This is how the two applications can talk to each other programmatically. So just want to throw that out there so for audiences who may not be as technical.
That's fair. Yeah, absolutely. So that the programs that we've written today, and we use this API technique that you just mentioned to provide information in a structured way. Well, in this architecture stack, you allow those AI models to be able to access that information. And that now all of a sudden allows them not only to have the world's knowledge, if you will, from the snapshot of time that they've been trained on, but also to be able to pull in information that's more relevant to the thing you're asking about or the context. And that is really the main word I want this audience to walk away with is grounding. It's basically taking the model and its capability to make up anything, right, based on some words and those other words. Here you go, I'm done. And ground that in the context in which, is in we call it reality, but really it's in the context in which you're controlling. So when you bring information in through these plug-in extensible capabilities, you're allowing the model to say, okay, I know these are the right words to respond with, but let me now also call this API or connect to this other thing to make sure that it's consistent with what this particular application or this user base is supposed to be seeing. And that is one of the mechanisms by which you achieve, the controls that one of your audience members asked about in terms of making sure that, bias or hallucination or other things are accounted for in the process before you show those results to the end user.
So help me out here. I want to take this architecture from, I have a startup idea to serve the underbanked. I don't know. I'm just going to throw something out randomly. We talked about credit before. So this idea is going to help people learn about credit and how to establish credit and the benefits that it can have on them based on their everyday life and their everyday spending habits. That's the app. Just thought about this, threw it out there.
Yep.
So now I have the plugin. So what in that scenario, I'm building this. What is the AI going to take care of, and what exactly is the co-pilot in that scenario?
So in the scenario where you're building a new application, the things you have to think about is where you're getting the information from that you're providing to the user. You mentioned, for example, their own finances, right? Like how they've spent money. Well, your application might be tracking that. Let's say your application is tracking, okay, you connect it to the bank using Plaid or something like that, and you pull in their last 30 transactions or 30 days of transactions, and you can see they spend, I don't know, monthly they spend, or let's say 90 days, 3 months in a row they spent whatever the price is on Netflix. Okay, so now you have this data in your application that is in your database somewhere in your application that says that, you know, they use this subscription from Netflix because you see the charge every month. Well, you can go write code that says like query, find the unique, spending for each vendor at this time. Yes, you could do that today. But now with this capability with AI, you could actually have a plugin that is able to read those transactions and bring them into the context of this model. And you can ask the model to reason about like, what are the patterns in this particular data set? And now instead of having to write code to go do some of that, the model could actually your architecture could call the API, bring that results into the context of the model query. And now you say, well, what do I spend the most on? And it can go organize things like, oh, you spent on Netflix every day. This is one of your subscriptions because you've done it three times in a row in a month. The model's capability to reason about all these words and all the data that's in the data set is a lot more efficient, I would argue, than having to write specific code that you might miss a pattern or two in there. And so combining the data that you would build into your application and the model's ability to reason about that and the model's ability to take questions from the end user is a powerful combination to be able to provide a capability like what you're describing is, for this application without necessarily having to think about every scenario from which this customer would want to, you would need to interact with your application.
Based on that same use case, amazing. Thank you for that. Now, I'm not as familiar with AI, right? But I love everything that you're saying. How do I now create that model to do that interaction? How would that work?
Well, that's the beauty of the large language models is, the model is not yours at this point. The model belongs to, the community or the company. If you're using an open source one, it's a community model. If you're using something like OpenAI's model, while there's transparency, that model is a defined application endpoint that you can access and send in the query and get the results and then communicate through your application those results. So the model is something you don't have to build. In fact, the expense, as you can imagine, to build a model over, billions of parameters is a really, really expensive proposition for the average application developer. It's not feasible. Because we have platforms like, obviously Microsoft has platforms and other companies have platforms that now give you access to these models, you have the ability to use the model and you don't have to worry about building the model. What you do worry about is building the additional context, the additional information that only uniquely your application has in conjunction with the model to get the best results for your user. And that's where the plugins and the Copilot building, responsibility to this community of your audience comes into play. That's where the power is. You don't have to go spend money building the model. You're using the model and spending money building your application and your features that can take advantage of the capabilities that this model has.
So now, I'm the founder of the startup. I'm excited about everything that you said. What exactly do I Google to find community models, or where in Microsoft do I go? Like, where can I find this information on how to get started?
Yeah, if you go to, I'll obviously point you to the Microsoft resources is the easiest I can think of off the top of my head. The Azure, if you search Azure AI, you will find a swath of information. And I would argue you'd probably get really, really good information using Bing search. But and either way, you go in and search Azure AI. You come into the Azure document website, and there's a swath of examples to get started. We have a lot of capabilities on the platform. Obviously, we partner with OpenAI at Microsoft, so we have some very unique capabilities for being able to access the OpenAI models, and we're quickly releasing capabilities to access the open source models as well within a framework, within this stack that you see here, that allows for very powerful enterprise capabilities that, again, your application won't have to worry about. Things like the responsible AI features, like what one of your users asked about. Well, sometimes you could ask a question that might be a little bit untoward, or you could get something into the system. Our application stack accounts for those conditions as well, and it will actually filter out and remove or give an error when you ask a question that doesn't make sense or is inappropriate, I should say, per our responsible AI usage guidelines to interact with. So you get that out of the box as a developer, using Microsoft's technology. We're actually running through these filters to control so that you don't get into untoward or inappropriate user responses, in the process. So things like that come with the stack. But if you look at the Azure AI capability, we have a very, very great starting guide to get started and start to build these applications.
Awesome. We have a comment from the audience. Just put it up. So this is a big one. Take a look at my thinking process. Most AI tools are bad financial advisors because the amount of data it has access to is limited in terms of financial consumer behavior. With access to a large stream of individual financial data, it might make better decisions. Now, financial institutions do not share all consumer data it possesses. Imagine all financial data being available via the blockchain while individuals maintain control over such information. Info is public because it's public on the, I missed that last part. It got cut off.
Probably on the chain, it might be what he's talking about.
Yeah, maybe said on the chain.
What do you think? It definitely is an approach. I think that would require some very interesting regulatory challenges that we could always explore. But to your same point, the things that I described in this conversation a few minutes ago make that a reality without having to expose users' public data. Because as an application owner, if I know that if I enable connecting in and your users trust your application to be able to say, yeah, you can connect to my bank account because I get an advantage of the features you're going to do to help me, we can bring that information into the query of what we call the prompt of the Copilot by using that plug-in extensible capability we talked about earlier. We are not giving that information to the model. We are not training the model on your personal data. We are not exposing the personal data to the model at all from the perspective of any kind of storage. What we're doing is when we ask the model a question and we say, oh, by the way, here's some more information before you answer that will be more appropriate for this question. So it's like, hey, what's the most popular subscription this user uses? And then in that same prompt, you would add in by using this plugin capability and pulling in and saying, by the way, this user, here's their last 30 transactions. And that's a query you're asking into the model. It's not retained, it's not stored, it's not remembered. And the model will now take those transactions and that question and put it into the context of that data versus the context of only the data it had been trained on, the thousands of parameters that were generic across the internet. That's the power of being able to sort of ground it in more meaningful information for your personal, for your user's personal utility than the generic ask the model question and it knows some generic data from the internet. That's the difference.
I got a question on that because I know there was a case that came up. I forget the company, but essentially they were using ChatGPT and they put in code, proprietary code to their company to get some assistance on. But then once they put it into ChatGPT, it now got it was able to be accessed by other users outside the company. How does one prevent something like that from happening with what you're saying in terms of leveraging a community-based model for your application?
Right. So the community models I can't speak to, but what I can say is for our Azure AI technology at Microsoft specifically, this is specifically what we're trying to address. So when you access the OpenAI models on our platform, it does not reach out back to, it's obviously OpenAI, right? It's ChatGPT, it's the same models, but we have running instances of those models that does not bring that data back into those models. So when you query on those models, that data is not being shared back to OpenAI or anything. It's, and in fact, if you're familiar with the Azure architecture, there's this concept of a tenant and a subscription. I won't necessarily go into those details right now, but it's basically a boundary that when you sign up and you put your email address and your credit card or whatever, that's your instance, your corner of Azure. And then when you sign up to access the OpenAI models, we essentially put the models inside your corner, and that's the boundary, right? And so those models are now accessible in your corner, but they're not being retrained. They're the instance of the model as they existed. And the way that you are able to leverage it is by what I described earlier, is bringing that additional context as you query those models in your corner. Those models have all the knowledge that they have built into them based on everything we talked about in this conversation. But then you bring that additional context of, yeah, here's this information about this user or about my data set for an enterprise, but it does not penetrate your boundary from your account or your subscription. And it stays within that. And then once the results come back, your application is responsible to display that to the user. And that's the only life cycle for that information flow. There is no retraining the model, sending it back to OpenAI, none of those things. So you want a trusted platform like in Azure. I'm sure there are others, but like in Azure, to be able to have that boundary protection that ensures that your queries and your proprietary type of information you're putting into the system to get the best results from the models is not shared back to the, to train the models more to others that you wouldn't want to have access to that data.
A last question regarding this. If I'm a startup trying to leverage this, how much does it cost? Or how does pricing work?
Yeah, so it's a pretty straightforward thing. For every and we don't have enough time to get into all the terminology, but the other terminology I'll share with the audience is tokens. And the idea of tokens, I would say, roughly correlates to words, but it's really, don't get overhung on that. It's not just words, but think of it as groups of text, right? About the size of a word, maybe 4 or 5 characters wide. Those tokens are essentially how these models break down the questions and the data that you're feeding it. It breaks it into these chunks of text and turns that into mathematical data that it can then navigate when it's looking and querying itself as you ask it questions. Well, those chunks of text are how we think about the pricing. Essentially, for every time you ask a question, you're sending in a chunk of text to be broken down, processed, checked in the neural network, and brought back out. Well, you pay for that process of breaking your question down into those tokens, and you pay for the process of the resulting tokens coming back. And so essentially it's a per token model, and you pay by the token, right? By the number of words you're asking, you pay at that scale. And it's a few, less than a couple of cents or whatever per, but I encourage you to go to the Azure website for our pricing model, but they all pretty much work the same right now, which is based on these tokens. And you can kind of get a sense of, like, if I'm going to query this many words or this many characters, this many tokens per month, you can get a sense of what your monthly expense would be to run this application on a month-to-month basis.
We have to take a brief moment for our sponsors. After we're going to get some closing thoughts from Mike. Give us a second for our sponsors, please.
Are you an emerging fintech with a limited budget seeking more sales and partners? Introducing Strategic Generation, your partner in leveraging cybersecurity for sales and partner enablement. Fintechs often lose opportunities due to unsophisticated cybersecurity programs. That's where we come in. Strategic Generation assists with due diligence, security posture visibility, penetration testing, and on-demand virtual CISO services. We connect your systems to our partnered platform, and voila! Instant access to real-time diagnostics and compliance frameworks such as SOC 2 and PCI DSS. Gain the confidence of prospects and partners. Strengthen your cybersecurity program and drive success. Stop losing deals due to cybersecurity. Visit strategicgeneration.com and click on On-Demand CISO to connect with an expert.
Like, brilliant as usual. Took a lot of information from this conversation as usual. Every time we talk, I gain information from you, man. Like, I think sometimes I leverage our friendship and stop by your house and just start asking like a ton of questions. But hey, I earned that right after decades of friendship and brotherhood.
Right, for sure.
So, closing thoughts and with how people can find you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think obviously I'm on LinkedIn as Michael Warthen, so you can find me there pretty easily. My closing thoughts relative to this conversation, and Nnamdi, is our experiences drive how we think about the world and what we do day to day, and it's easy to forget sometimes the nuances of what you've experienced as you're looking at new things, new technologies, and you're excited about what you're able to build going forward, and you see so much prospect forward that you forget what the challenges were behind. So I'd encourage your audience to always take a moment, pause, and think about, as you do these great new things and use new technologies like AI in your application building. And again, we didn't get into all the details, but the transformative nature of this particular moment is very difficult to overstate. Think about well, how would that impact me 30 years ago, 40 years ago? How would I do things differently? And using Nnamdi's example from the credit card scenarios, and if you're going to go build an application or build a capability in the financial world, don't forget that there's a large community of I would say arguably forgotten individuals that are simply not participating just because they don't have the information. And if building the information into your application was too costly before, things like these Copilot capabilities and these AIs change that math. And I would actually just encourage you to think about incorporating them and leveraging these in a way that will allow you to bring a broader user base into your application, which could benefit you and benefit the community as well, and really take advantage of these capabilities from these AI models. The other thing to think about from a technical perspective is, the next generation of applications that will inevitably be built on these technologies we talked about today are here, right? They're starting. We Microsoft have incorporated AI into every product that we have, and we've experienced building the stack is informed from that experience and how we think about how we enable things like Word or other products to bring these capabilities in. So this is a real next generation of applications are really going to be based on and leveraging these AI technologies. And so get in the driver's seat, learn as much as you can about AI and how to incorporate these models in particular to really help accelerate your goals in terms of building applications and business capabilities.
Mike, as always, thank you very much for joining today. Great information. When time permits, we'll love to have you back on the show for deeper dives in this subject. And have a spectacular weekend, Mike.
All right, you too. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Thanks for having me, Nnamdi.
Cheers. Thank you to the audience. Thanks for all the comments, and all the feedback, DMs. We love you guys, and have a spectacular weekend. Make it great. Cheers. Catch us back next Friday, 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time live.
All right.
Yeah.
Bye.